Welcome to our show. This is Mary's Eclectic Interests, and I'm Juanita Hoff. This show is going to be particularly about AARP and Ethel Piercy Andrus, who was the person that founded it. We're very glad to have as guests here tonight, Will Phillips and Kate Schaefer. I'm going to let each of them introduce yourself a little bit to our wider audience and tell them about what your role at AARP is.
Juanita, thank you for having us here tonight. And I just want to also say that I'm volunteer state president of AARP, so that's a volunteer role. I work with our executive council as well as our staff at AARP to further the mission of the organization in our state.
And Will?
Sure. And it's great to be here. So I'm the state director for the organization. We have a team of 8 staff and then hundreds of volunteers across the state who again help us carry out the mission for the organization on behalf of our members. We've got about 670,000 members here in Minnesota.
Wow. Yep. Thought we'd start out with the books that are laying in front of both of you. It's a book by Craig Walker, the biography about a woman who changed America. Maybe you can each tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so Ethel Piercy Andrus was an amazing woman. She not only launched AARP, but she also furthered the issue with getting access for young adults as well as older adults to being able to live with dignity and resources.
Now, when was she born?
She was born in 1881. So you can imagine just some of the changes that she saw as we look at just the women's movement and the Industrial Revolution and some of the changes in the educational system along the way. She was an educator, and she worked at a school in Chicago to begin with. She worked at Lewis Institute, which was innovative in and of itself. Part of what that institute did was look at how they can teach people in an applied way to take some of that learning and use it in the workplace. And she also was a volunteer at that time. She volunteered at Hull House, which served some of the immigrant populations in the Chicagoland area at a time when there was tremendous immigration and tremendous poverty for people who were coming into the city.
I'll get your viewpoint on the book.
You know, I think the book marks an important juncture for AARP in that 2018 was our 60th anniversary. And so the book came out in conjunction with that anniversary as an opportunity to tell the story of our founder, who, as Kate said, was a remarkable woman. I think in today's terms, we'd call her a disruptor. Because I think at that time, when AARP and when Dr. Andrus was out doing her work, older adults were seen in a very kind of negative perception. They were seen as a drain, as a growing pool of dependence that were gonna, be a burden and all of these things. And she really sought to flip that narrative on its head and to demonstrate the value of older adults, but then also to really help organize older adults to make sure that, as Kate said, people could live their lives with dignity, with independence, with purpose. And so I think that she's left an indelible mark on the country, but also thinking about somebody who had such a remarkable career, really creating a second act that was perhaps far greater than the first, or at least equally as great, is something that that is just, I think, a great story to tell today as we're continuing to struggle with some of this.
It's the same, some of the same issues.
Some of the same stuff, that's right.
And reading her book, it's amazing the vision that she had. And not only was she an incredible visionary of looking at how we can disrupt the way that we are seeing aging, the potential for older adults to contribute in society, but she was also able to translate that vision into action and made real change happen. And change that impacted people's daily lives. So she was just an amazing person. And then she also was able to rally people around a vision. And she realized that collectively, people's voices could really make change happen. So she was a social innovator as well.
Maybe you can tell a little bit about her background that brought her to be this kind of person that's really working to bring good change to people?
So she was born into a family that was very socially conscious and civically engaged. They moved to Chicago, so a lot of her growing up years were in Chicago.
Sure.
And she saw her parents as role models along those lines of how to stay engaged and contribute within your community. And so she, from an early age, saw volunteering and in community engagement as being core parts of who she was. And that translated throughout her life, and also the way she looked at people who are in immigrant communities and people who are older adults. She saw the potential for how they could contribute to their communities through volunteering, through civic engagement. So she saw potential where other people saw problems.
She said her mother was a redhead and her father had a red beard, and that contributed to the fire that really drove her in her life.
Yes.
And I think what Kate's talking about, her early life, that really translated then into when she worked in the schools.
Right.
And in particular, the high school that she went and ultimately was principal in California. One of the first things she did was put over the gates to the school in big, large letters the word opportunity. And it was less about teaching and more about learning for her. And I think that that was also a school that had lots of immigrant communities there. And she really lifted that up, thought of that as something to value. And then I think really was innovative in terms of bringing adult learning onto that campus. So that whole concept of learning throughout life and being a campus, a school campus that was intergenerational was something that Dr. Andrus innovated even in that setting.
Yeah, and her school, she became principal in 1916. And she was the first woman principal in a school in California, a big urban school. Now think about it, 1916 is before she could even vote. So it's a pretty phenomenal accomplishment for a woman to have that kind of responsibility. And then, as Will said, she transformed that school, and she not only did she bring in adult education, because she thought that a school should not only serve the children but also their parents and the community. But that school became a community hub, and it was an opportunity to help people learn at all ages.
Very, very visionary. Because you have schools now that are just trying to move out into bringing parts of the community into the school. And that was a long time ago. What was her educational background?
Well, she got a degree, I believe, in education. She started at the University of Chicago and then finished, and I'm not going to remember the name of this school.
I think it was the Lewis Institute.
Lewis Institute, there you go.
And what she did, so she got her teaching degree, but then she went back in her 40s and got a master's and a PhD. And so she was a lifelong learner. And so she had that PhD, so she was influential in educational policy throughout her career as well.
What a well-rounded woman, right?
Yes.
With all the things that you need to create change. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about why she retired then. I think she was 62 when she retired from the high school that you were talking about.
Well, like lots of folks, she ended up being a caregiver at that point in her life. And like people today, that caregiving responsibility and working don't always mesh. And that's one of the priority areas for AARP currently, is looking at ways to help caregivers. But so she quit her job, she retired so she could care for her mother. Now, one of the wonderful things that came out of that was that with her good care, her mother actually did make a turn her health, and she was able to recover from that. But she also recognized that this was a time to think about, not everyone has that kind of care, and how do we help advocate for people as they're aging to get the kinds of services and the kinds of help that they may need. So that was part of why she got involved.
So then the mind to put all kinds of ideas together, right?
The mind and the encouragement from her mother as well, who, before she died, told Dr. Andrus that she should do as she had done for her, for everybody else, essentially. So, I think an encouragement all through life, but certainly through that caregiving experience, which is such a common experience for all of us, but clearly one that was formative for Dr. Andrus as well.
And so her mother really encouraged her to move forward.
And also at that time, there was mandatory retirement for a lot of people. And
You're
so,
right.
here she is, launching this new endeavor, this new work that is, as Will said, just as important, if not more so, than her early career.
Right, and it wasn't valued by society.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but she was able to really make a difference in her later life that has a lasting impact today.
A visual model of what your organization stands for, right?
That's right.
Yes.
Now, when she returned to work after retiring, she was at the Association of California Secondary School Principals.
That's right.
What did she do there at that juncture in her life?
I remember reading that she was in charge of welfare, and so essentially going out and checking on retired educators, which led her to really the experience that caused the formation ultimately of AARP. But her job was to check on the well-being, the welfare of fellow educators, retired educators, and then to ensure that steps were taken to rectify or remedy whatever situations or causes people might find themselves in.
And people didn't get a lot for retirement back at that point in time, right?
They certainly didn't. And the other thing that was lacking, in addition to any type of significant financial benefits, would be health care. This was before Medicare existed, and so healthcare costs and the lack of healthcare coverage was a significant challenge for older adults after they left the workforce.
Well, and one of the stories that really moved her was that she visited, during one of these welfare checks, a former teacher that was living in a chicken coop.
Oh my goodness.
And she was trying to survive off of a pension of $40 a month, and she could not support herself. And seeing the squalor that she lived in, Dr. Andrus became angry, and she then looked at what we could do about it. And this was really the impetus to look at how can we help, not only look at pension reform and help teachers who have devoted their lives to students and to the next generation, how do we help them retire with dignity and take care of some of their needs? But then also the issue of healthcare was another looming issue, and so she saw the need to bring people together, to organize so that some of these issues could be addressed.
With regard to healthcare, it wasn't just advocating for policy or legislative solutions, but it was thinking about how the marketplace was not serving the older demographic
as well.
And so the story goes that she was turned down by 42 different insurance companies. She was going out trying to find an insurance company that would insure retired teachers. And took a no 41 times before her 42nd visit, when she finally found an insurance company that would insure this group of retired educators. And so it's that model of not just trying to find public or legislative solutions, but also to make sure that the private market, private companies are responding to the needs of people, and understanding that there's value in the collective, that if you won't respond to one person, maybe you respond to dozens or thousands.
And she also proved the model. So there were so many assumptions and stereotypes and ageism about if you're over 65, you have health issues and that you'll be too expensive to insure. And because she was able to get a company that took a risk and did a pilot, they were able to show that, in fact, this was a group that overall was healthy. And so, the assumption that you're over 65 and that you have high medical needs, now some obviously did, just as any population, but she proved that people who are in this age range are not necessarily frail. And so it's a time when people can be very engaged and active and physically sturdy, and so that this was a way to disrupt the way that we were thinking about older adults.
And that's a big thing to do in society, right? Someone that can see the way clear to show other people what could be instead of what is.
That's right.
She had an organization that she created to help this group of people?
Sure, I think you're talking about the National Retired Teachers Association, and that was that idea of leveraging the strength of the collective, of multiple individuals to improve the condition of whatever group you're talking about. So in this case, it was educators, and I think that she sought to improve the financial security of retired educators, addressing some of those pension issues and financial security issues, healthcare issues, but then also making sure that retired educators were staying connected with the current issues of education and with current people in the workforce as well.
And she also addressed some housing as well. So she was part of a group that launched a housing complex, a community living environment for people that was reasonably priced, and it provided support.
And then figuring out how to bring people together to make it happen.
Yes. And then her thinking evolved also as we looked at healthcare. So the Retired Teachers Association really did change the landscape for retired teachers around healthcare. But there were others who were not retired teachers who were also interested in accessing healthcare benefits, and so that was part of the evolution of how AARP started, to make the organization broader and invite people, anyone who was 55 or older could now be a member. And so it started off as the American Association of Retired persons, and became AARP as we know it today.
That's right. Yep.
Now, do you go by the acronym or what the letters stand for?
That's a great question. So we're just AARP. We ceased years ago from being called the American Association of Retired Persons.
That's what I thought.
The primary reason is because more than half of our members still work. So if you think about the AARP membership, we start at 50 now. And so we could have members who still have young children in the house, all the way up to our oldest member who may be 105 years old and have great-grandchildren. So the membership really is a diverse membership, but more and more, regardless of age, as we know, people are working. So we are AARP, and our mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age, whether that be retirement, working, or somewhere in between. So.
And it's interesting, the first issue of Modern Maturity, which was the magazine associated with AARP, I believe it came out in the late 1950s. But there was an article in that first issue about getting a job after age 65. So this is really part of the landscape that has always been there for people, of just trying to figure out how to navigate that. But today it is certainly a reality that many, many people are looking at continuing to work past a traditional retirement age, or finding some way to blend work and retirement and volunteering. And so the way that we're living today definitely has a work component.
Oh, definitely. And I know a number of people that I know work just to get health insurance, right?
That's right.
Yes.
So kind of tying all of that together.
Sometimes it's choice. Other times it's passion. Other times it's just that I need to keep working because I need money, or I need health care. Sometimes it's I need to keep working so that my children have health care. So people are making these choices and these decisions for all kinds of reasons. But regardless of the reason, they all face similar obstacles or challenges in gaining that employment. Things like age discrimination, things like skills and training and those kinds of things. And so there are some things that we can do to lift people up.
Now, the big impetus for her was to move into the healthcare field?
Healthcare was a big driver of it. I think that healthcare costs were a major reason why retirees struggled in the 1950s. It was, of course, pre-Medicare, which wasn't established until 1965. And so I think that was a significant driver. I think it was also around this kind of pernicious narrative or stereotype about what it meant to be old in America. And so I think it was those two things that really motivated her and drove her to put this organization together, and it's one that's really been a mainstay and a force in this country ever since.
Oh, definitely.
And her vision, again, that we have people who are older adults who have so much to contribute. And they are able to live vibrant, engaged, contributing lives, that this was her vision, and this is still our vision of, our mission is to help people age in the way that they want to age with dignity. And so looking at what she was looking at, I mean, in healthcare, care was a big piece of it.
Oh, right.
But there's also all of those other dimensions, like, you know, housing, affordable housing, caregiving, I mean, all of these things that are interrelated, and prescription drugs. And so as I look at what she did, and this book gives some great, you know, a timeline on some of her contributions, but the issues that she was championing back then and through that time are still relevant today and still form a lot of what we're advocating around, because those issues still exist. They might look different today, and there's different nuances, but they still are issues that impact people as they age, and they're important to that dignity and that the way that we age.
Yeah. Well, and you bring a lot of resources to people as they're working their way through that aging time, right?
Yes, yes. I also want to mention too, so one of the things that really struck me with her vision is in 1961, she looked at a universal design house. And actually there's a wonderful photo in here of her with President Eisenhower looking at a model of this house. But in 1961, she was talking about how people can age in place, and if we implement aspects of universal design, we can help people stay in their homes, you know, as long as they want to be staying in their homes. And we know today that those principles are so important for people aging, not only aging in place, but you know, what's good for an older adult is also good for a young person.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right.
Still things that we work on.
They haven't been solved.
Haven't been solved. You know, if you ask our members, they'll say that the community where they live today is 80% of them will say that's where they want to live for as long as they can imagine. It may not be the house, but it's the community. It's the proximity to neighbors, to churches, to friends and family, to all of their social networks. But if you live in a 1920s Foursquare that has the bathroom upstairs and the laundry in the basement, that may not be possible. Yeah. So what are we doing to create housing options that are affordable but also that are accessible? So the same thing that she was talking about in 1961 with President Eisenhower are things that we're talking about today with Mayor Fry or with whatever mayor it might be in cities across this country. So there are issues where we've made progress, but they haven't gone away. And I think the same thing holds true for these narratives that we're talking about.
Right.
How many times do we hear people talk about the dreaded silver tsunami? And so all of a sudden we're comparing older people to, you know, natural disasters that kill tens of thousands of people, as opposed to thinking about the opportunities that we have. Sure, there are challenges, and that's part of the work that we do, but it's really a lot about thinking about a different narrative for how aging exists in this country.
Even when she looked at these communities where older people may live, she looked at ways that they could also volunteer their time. So for the retired teachers, a natural place was volunteering in the classroom. And so she did make arrangements for that because she knew purpose was important and that give back was important. She also worked with some of the veterans homes and had some of the older adults as volunteers there for to help veterans who are lonely. And so she saw not only this, you know, having access to affordable housing and housing that fits physically for people, but then also how do you create communities that engage people and seeing older adults as this resource. And that is a piece that was really disrupting aging too, because they weren't seen as a resource.
And it's sort of changing, right?
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, hearing you talk about going into the classroom, AARP Foundation has a program today called Experience Corps, and it is about older adults going into the classroom, K through 3, and working on early childhood literacy. And it's not just tutoring; it's building relationships as mentors, as tutors as well, and making that difference. And it's hundreds of volunteers in the Twin Cities and in communities across the country where that's happening. And so, no, that civic engagement, that community engagement, what Dr. Andrus called that useful, or that army of useful citizens, is something that is part of who we are certainly today.
Now, AARP had a building at the 1962 New York World's Fair. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Also just showcasing and helping the general population as well as the world forum to see the potential of older adults. And so it was part of this Disrupt Aging models of looking at what is possible, and some of the technology that they had at the time, and some of the design that they were looking at, and community-oriented work that they were doing. So it was a great way to showcase what older adults are, the potential for older adults.
Now there's an Older American Act that was passed in 1965. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is and what it has led to?
Well, I think it was really an opportunity for this country to have a deliberate focus on aging. They had an individual who was appointed to lead the work on aging. And the Older Americans Act since then has provided funding for countless programs that have kept older adults independent and living in community. One of the ones that is best known, perhaps among viewers, is Meals on Wheels.
Oh, right.
That helps people with nutrition and with meals who perhaps can't get out of the house or don't have a caregiver that's able to provide that help on certain days. Is a program that has been funded by Older Americans Act dollars for a very long time. And so a lot of these programs, the Older Americans Act, Medicare, the work that we've done to protect programs like that, to protect programs like Social Security, those are really the linchpin programs that allow people to remain independent in community for as long as possible. And it's something that has been part of our past and will continue to be part of our future as an advocacy organization.
Right. And after Medicare came into being, then AARP worked on the Medigap policies too, seeing the need for that.
Every iteration. So the supplement policies, fast forwarding even further, thinking about when George W. Bush was president and the enactment of the prescription drug program in Medicare, Medicare Part D. And so it is a continuous effort to improve the lives of older adults and our members, and public programs like Medicare have a major role in that.
Oh, definitely. Now, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the last benefit that Dr. Andrus managed to get through Congress, which is a good endeavor just by itself, right? Is that she did the Age Discrimination in Employment Act in 1967.
Okay.
Well, and so, at that time, discrimination was tolerated. Now, we still have ageism in the workplace, but that set some expectations for employers that they couldn't discriminate against people, and I believe it's 45 and older, which is interesting to think of that as being an older worker. But looking at workers who are older as being able to be discriminated against. And so that was a pivotal legislation as part of just even civil rights and rights of people who are needing and wanting to work, that they were able to continue to do that and have some rights.
Well, she certainly has made a difference in our whole country. If people want to get a copy of that book, how can they do it?
I think that Mary has some information that she's going to flash on the screen.
All right, we'll put some information up. If you want to get that copy of that book, we'll have an information on the screen for you.
And you can download it as a PDF if you're wanting. It's free, but you can also purchase the book.
Right. And then if you've got any inkling to volunteer, contact your organization.
That's right. If you visit aarp.org/mn, we have hundreds of volunteers that do everything from advocate at the Capitol with us to preparing free tax returns as part of our AARP Foundation Tax Aid Program, to teaching driver safety, to tutoring in classrooms, to doing community engagement all over the board, all over the state. And there's always a need out there, and we're in need of help to do that work.
And it is a phenomenal organization to volunteer for. There are so many ways, as Will said, but then there's also the potential to dial up or dial down your participation. And as a volunteer, I can say that
that's important.
That AARP is one of the most phenomenal organizations for supporting volunteers. It is part of the DNA of the organization, and I think it comes from Dr. Andrus's orientation about the importance of volunteers, but there's a voice of volunteers at all levels in the organization. And so as a volunteer, I feel like I have the ability to talk with staff and have a voice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juanita.
Thank you so much.
Helping us learn about AARP and Dr. Andrus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Mary's Eclectic Interests, and we hope that you'll join us again.